I would just like to take a moment of your time to just acknowledge the fact that Skittles are amazing. Please excuse the constant sound of bass dropping in the doors right down the hallway from here. No doubt that the camera is indeed picking that up. That is beyond my control, and those are nothing but a bunch of fucktards who think they're black, but really they are as white can be. Hello YouTube, this is Adam Noyes of AN Productions, and welcome to the next episode of the Godzilla Vlogs, where we talk about anything and everything Godzilla. Or the other way around, whatever. Doesn't really matter. Godzilla's Revenge is a piece of shit. We all know this, every Godzilla fan knows this. It is like the bottom of the barrel for the worst Godzilla movie ever made. It is widely considered by everyone to be the biggest pieces of shit to ever drop into the Godzilla barrel. So I suppose you're wondering, why Adam? Why would you make a video defending this movie? Well, that's because I want to talk about that. That's what I want to do. Now, one of the things that I really want to defend this movie for, and there isn't much to defend, trust me, this movie is indeed a gigantic piece of dog shit. But what's interesting about Godzilla's Revenge is really the production history of this movie. This movie was put together in about 3 months. One of the things that really just shocks me, and shocks most of the Godzilla community who's really interested in this stuff, is who directed it. It was none other than Ishiro Honda, the man who gave us the masterpiece that was the original, the man who gave us so many great classic films. Ishiro Honda directed this movie, and also worked on the screenplay. Now, it is very clear from this point on that this was when Ishiro Honda had hit the bottom of the barrel of his career. Ever since the 1950s, Ishiro Honda before that had had a very colorful career working as a second unit director for other crime thrillers, working with his friend Akira Kurosawa. He also directed several documentaries. In fact, that's what he started off on, which kind of explains some of his style. And he also worked on some war dramas and stuff like that, one in which starring Toshiro Mifune, widely considered the greatest Japanese actor of all time. But as the 60s went on, Toho just started hiring him as kind of like a gun, because, you know, he's good at directing these kind of movies, these kind of sci-fi movies that are just full of special effects. And that's why I've gone on in record of saying that there is no Ishiro Honda without Eiji Tsuburaya, and there is no Eiji Tsuburaya without Ishiro Honda. Those two worked together so well that it almost became kind of like a symbiotic relationship between the two, where they just worked together and really made some really interesting stuff. Even the bad movies, such as Space Amoeba, King Kong Escapes, and so on and so forth, Latitude Zero, even those movies had very interesting sets, had very interesting designs, and aesthetically looked astonishing, which was very much in keen with Ishiro Honda and very much in keen with Eiji Tsuburaya. Why is this movie so bad? Ishiro Honda, one of the smartest mans ever, the king of allegory, makes this movie, and it is widely considered by fans, as I've stated earlier, the worst piece of shit you could possibly imagine. Now, there's a few reasons why I want to say this and I want to defend it. One, this movie had a very short and tight budget. This film, I think, had the smallest budget of any Japanese movie that year, made by a major studio. Japan was going through a radical change when it came to the movie theaters and the studio systems. Before this, Toho was the mecca of making movies. If you wanted to make a big A-grade movie, you went to Toho. Toho made everything. He produced all the Akira Kurosawa movies, just to name something of the A-grade list. And eventually, they even started making the Masaaki Kobayashi epics, such as Kwaidan and Samurai Rebellion, two of his best movies. Toho was the place where you made a name for yourself as well. They had programs such as the New Face, which was kind of like a college program almost that helped you act and it gave you jobs and everything like that. They were like the key definition of the Hollywood studio system, where you'd sign up for them and they give you a contract and you work with X amount of movies with them. That's what they did. They created jobs by doing this. They were very self-sufficient. The executives at Toho, Tomiyuki Tanaka being one of them, controlled every aspect of production. A true definition of a vertically integrated company was Toho. The perfect definition. I can't really think of any other studio that was so perfectly vertically integrated, even in the United States. And Toho was so self-centered that suddenly this invention comes around called television. And the television boom in the United States happened in the 1950s. And it kind of happened here in the United States, but only here in Japan. It kind of happened in Japan. But in a much minor, only the richest of the rich had televisions. And that's very much so portrayed in the original Godzilla, where the Yamane family has it. The Yamane family was a rather well-to-do family in Japan at the time. Japan was roughly anywhere 10 to 20 years behind us. They really, really were. By the 1950s here in the United States, we pretty much had converted to color in terms of film. While Japan was just starting to do color. Again, Rodan, for example, being the first color tokusatsu film ever. Our first color kaiju film ever. What was happening in America was that television was starting to take over, and people who would go to the movie theaters every week to watch a new movie started like, why should I do that when I could sit down and watch it for almost for free on my television? That is where the widescreen boom came in. We had all of these different widescreen aspect ratios to make films look bigger and grander started happening. That's why one reason why we have so many epics made in the 1950s and 60s in the United States was because they wanted to get butts back in seats. Studios wanted to get butts back in seats. That happened mainly in the 1950s. By the 1960s, things kind of started laying out, where companies started realizing they could advertise their films on television and so on and so forth, and that cinema was never going to go away. That didn't happen until the 1960s. And ironically, Eiji Tsuburaya helped bring about the end of the kaiju movie. He really did, because he started switching to television with Tsuburaya Productions, and that what really, in my opinion, led to the downgrade of all these kaiju movies, be it Gamera or be it Godzilla. That as these movies went along, the budgets and the time it took to make these movies started getting smaller and smaller and smaller to compensate for the lack of butts going in seats. In Japan, the amount of people going to movies every week had literally been cut by 2/3. That is a lot of money that had to be made up somehow, because businesses need to stay afloat. All right, this is what Toho did, though, was kind of a detriment to, in many ways, to the film itself. Did the practical business approach, and quite frankly, I will not harp this business for it. I think Toho made the right decision because they wanted to keep their doors open. Their opinion was basically, well, we can either get rid of everyone by having our company go completely bankrupt, like what Dai did. Dai went through this project where everybody just got fired because of how bankrupt Dai managed to go, because they didn't bother to stop being centralized. Toho's approach was like, okay, well, we can't do that. Instead of firing everyone, having to let them go because we go bankrupt, let's fire off 1/3. Yes, it sucks for that 1/3, but in the end, that's a better decision than having everyone leave. And I will defend Toho for making these decisions of decentralizing with him. The Toho New Face thing, that went away, that disappeared. And that fucked over quite a few actors, where suddenly they were just barely starting to get their acting career up, and suddenly they are just left without a job. Yes, that hurts, but that's what happens when you're in an economic situation where you're not really growing. And yes, I am going to get into that with this video, because it is very important as to what happened with Godzilla's Revenge. Ishiro Honda kind of fell into that gap as well. Ishiro Honda, this was the point in his life where Ishiro Honda was really questioning his career. At this time, he wanted to be done. But quite frankly, he needed the money. Between 1969, which is when this movie was made, and 1975, Ishiro Honda mainly worked in television. He directed several episodes of The Return of Ultraman, which was Ultraman Jack, I believe. He directed several episodes of that. And that gave, to be honest, he didn't mind it, because he felt like he had a little more freedom with that show and stuff like that. Because, it was something to be produced for television, and he had some free reign over that. In fact, he's one of the reasons why actually Ultraman Jack has, in my opinion, one of the better character arcs, is because Ishiro Honda worked on the scripts and everything like that. But he missed the grandness of film. quite frankly, he very much so missed the heyday, the late 50s and the early 60s of Toho, because he felt like television could never, and in many ways is correct, could never capture the true grandness that is cinema. The true grandness. And I agree with him. I agree with him that he could never recapture that. And because Ishiro Honda was such a good business, was such a devoted man, and so grateful to Toho for giving him the chance to at least start his career, despite being pleaded by his friend Akira Kurosawa to go about his route and start his own company, Ishiro Honda said, no, I'm going to stay with Toho. I'm going to stick with my guns and I'm going to stay with Toho. Kind of ironic that that's kind of what led to the downfall of his career. Some people will call Ishiro Honda a pushover for doing that, for not sticking with his artistic guns and going the same route that Akira Kurosawa did. However, I would like to say that Akira Kurosawa going his own route wound up biting him in the ass several times. That is why between 1970, when he released Dutskadan, I think it was Dutskadan, it's his worst movie. One of the only financial disappointing movies he's ever released. And when he made Kekemusha, he hardly made anything in between there. He made Dirt Suizawa, which I believe is one of his unsung masterpieces. But he had a very hard time gaining financial support. Ishiro Honda decided to be safe and says, I would rather have a career where I have little say in the movie, but still manage to have bread on my table for my wife and for my family, than to have complete artistic control over my films, but risk running the route of Akira Kurosawa, where he doesn't have any money or anything like that. And in fact, it got to the point where Akira Kurosawa actually tried to kill himself because he was so depressed at the situation that Kurosawa was finding his production company in, and how he is unable to greenlight any of his movies. In fact, if Kagemusha and Ran would not have been made because of the disappointing, or how Akira Kurosawa's kind of persona and how he'd always go over budget and everything like that kind of ate away why no studio would want to give him money. If it wasn't for people like George Lucas and Francis Ford Coppola, Kagemusha and Ran would not have been made. And I also would like to say that I don't believe Ran and Kagemusha would have been made without Ishiro Honda. Because I believe what Ishiro Honda did to Akira Kurosawa was very much kind of like his grounding, you know. Well, Akira Kurosawa had all these grand ideas and these grand visions of these epics that he wanted to make, and Kagemusha and Ran are definitely epics. Beautiful, beautiful epics. Ishiro Honda kept him on the down low and kept him, kind of slapped him on the wrist a few times and said, nope, this is how it's got to work. And people would call Ishiro Honda a pushover for that, for sticking with the studio instead of going with his guns. So no, I would not call Ishiro Honda a pushover. I call him, in many ways, a practical man. And in many ways, that's what Ishiro Honda was. He was the practical man. I wouldn't call him a businessman, but his brain was wired like a businessman's. And it made a lot of sense why he made the decisions he did, and I will defend him for making those decisions. So along comes Godzilla's Revenge. In Godzilla's Revenge, they just basically said, make a Godzilla movie without making a real Godzilla movie. Here's all the stock footage, use all this stock footage. That's why Godzilla has no real essence of actual footage in it. I mean, there is stuff between Minla and Godzilla and Gahhhh, but that's it. The rest of it is literally stock footage, because they didn't have any time to make it. It was like Dai making Gamera Super Monster. They had no time making that movie. They had no money making that movie. It was made to simply make a few bucks. Gamera Super Monster was made in a desperate attempt to make Dai some money so that they could salvage what was left of their company. And of course it failed miserably because Gamera Super Monster was a complete and total box office bomb. The same thing happened with Godzilla's Revenge. Toho was in desperate need of money. They needed to figure out, because by this time they hadn't quite figured out, okay, we're going to decentralize Toho. They're still like, okay, what can we do to kind of consolidate? What can we do to bring money here? What can we do here? And in that bit, they realized that the Godzilla franchise, especially with the huge success that was Ishiro Honda's film previous, Destroy All Monsters, that was a humongous success. And rightfully so, that movie is fucking masterful. They said, we have a moneymaker here. Let's make something quick to kind of slow the sinking of our ship. For the record, the same thing happened with 20th Century Fox and the Planet of the Apes movies. So they brought in Ishiro Honda, and At the time, Agent Tsuburaya was extremely sick. He was, quite frankly, in the last stages of his life because he was in severe pain. And that's one reason why Sadamasa Arikawa kind of took over the director baton for the special effects for a long time. It's because Agent Tsuburaya was in the last stages of lung cancer. He was dying. He was sick in bed most of the time. And instead of spending money on hiring Sadamasa Arikawa to do the special effects for this movie, what little there is, they said, Ishiro Honda, you've worked with Agent Tsuburaya, you know how things work, you direct the special effects for this movie. What? Though they're supervised by Agent Tsuburaya. No, he only walked on set like twice. Really, and it's no fault of Agent Tsuburaya, he was fucking sick, he couldn't. Ishiro Honda had to direct the special effects in this movie. You see the problem there. He wasn't a person to direct, special effects. That was somebody else's job, and Ishiro Honda admittedly would admit that. He admitted that. He works better with actual flesh and blood, actual actors. Special effects require a lot more tricky work to it. Though granted, with that Ishiro Honda touch, we have sequences where, Godzilla walks up to Minya and rubs his head, though that is basically nothing but a shot-for-shot remake of something that happened in Son of Godzilla. And in my opinion, it's done a lot better in Son of Godzilla. Now, another thing I want to say is that I don't believe Godzilla's Revenge is a Godzilla movie. And the main reason why I want to say that is because this movie takes place in reality. It doesn't take place in the kaiju realm that was created back then. That was created for the Godzilla universe specifically. This movie takes place completely in the mind of an 8-year-old child. Now, in defense of Godzilla's Revenge, they had the potential to make something interesting, and I believe they had the beginnings of something very interesting. What's really interesting about this is that Japan at the time was going through a very big radical change when it came to the family structure. Japan was usually very conservative when it came to their families, where it was the children had a mother to come home to, they had a father figure, they had 2 parents. And Agent Tsuburaya, Ishiro Honda really subscribed to that. He really did. He really subscribed to the fact that he wanted that a child should at least go home to a parent and have 2 parents that love them greatly. To raise them correctly, quite frankly. And isn't that interesting that Ichiro, just a little bit play on Ichiro, was a boy who has been bullied horribly in school, and all he has is a father. And his father is constantly working, because it's not that his father constantly, or it's not that his father doesn't love his son. There's clearly a love in there, and in my opinion, Kenji Sahara does a good job at portraying that. There is genuine love and affection that he has towards his son, and that he cares greatly for his son, but yet he has to work to maintain that love, to make sure that Ichiro has a home to go home to, and has food and has shelter. So Ichiro, despite the fact that he does have a dad, doesn't really have a father figure, so instead Ichiro runs over to Shinpei, who is the toy shop owner, played by Doctor Who, and that kind of becomes Ichiro's real father figure in the film. And I do love Eisei Yamamoto's performance in that sequence. He does genuinely like Ichiro and everything like that. It's a very interesting dynamic there. That is really interesting stuff that you could play with a lot. This boy growing up in a shitty area of town, just above poverty, not very much above it, but just barely above poverty. A father who loves him, but works too hard. A man who wants to love Ichiro and give him the affection that he wants, but just simply has to work too hard. And Shinpei is the same way. And at the same time, Ichiro, being slightly overweight and doing all this stuff, is being bullied horrendously in school. Quite frankly, Ichiro's life is fucking miserable. And so what does he do? He retreats into a fantasy world where he has complete and total control. Where he can have fun, where he can be the kid that he wants to be. And that's why he befriends Minla, and that's how he learns from Minla to basically fight back against the bullies. Which I think is a wonderful, wonderful message. I do. I think they fucked it up during the last act of the movie, don't get me wrong. Specifically, the last 5 minutes of the film. They really fucked it up. But I think it's an interesting idea. If you're getting bullied, fight back. Don't give a damn what the teacher's saying. Fight back. Defend yourself. Do something. That is good stuff. I love that. I agree with that. If you get bullied and you get hit, you have every right to punch back. That's what I believe in. That's what I always believe in. That's what I will continue to believe in. That, I think, is a good message. I do. And you can fight with me all you want. I think that's a good message. Where I believe this movie fucked up royally, because I think they had a lot of interesting stuff. You could have had a very interesting character-driven movie if you focused on Ichiro, Shinpei, and his father. If you really focused on those dynamics. Alright? I think you would have had a very, very interesting movie. I would have cut out the bank robbers, to be completely honest. I would have cut out the bank robbers. I would have just had it been a regular, typical child. Instead, he has to be thrown into this whole pit, and he has to get thrown into the bank robbers, and they have to fight the bank robbers. Yeah, I would have cut that out. Just fucking get rid of it. Just instead focus on Ichiro fighting Gahhhh, who is the nickname of one of the bullies. And the other thing that would have changed, and what I think would have made this movie a lot better. You know, and this is granted, if I was to make this movie, I would have made it completely differently, but don't get me wrong. But if I had to like keep the same sort of structure the same, I would have done, this is what I'm talking about here. This is what I would have done. Is I wouldn't have had Minla talk, especially in that goofy voice, and he has a goofy voice in both versions of the film. I think it would have been a lot more powerful if instead of talking to Minla, and where everything is just kind of constantly shoved into your fucking face, you'd have it where Minla doesn't talk, and Minla's just kind of like the pet to Ichiro. Wouldn't that have been more interesting, is instead of them talking, you have to figure everything out through visual contact. This is what I've said about movies like Walking with Dinosaurs. Actually, no. This is what I've said about movies like Disney's Dinosaur, where they talk. The dinosaurs talk, because they thought the audience would be too stupid to get it. I've said many times that I believe that movie would have been way better if the dinosaurs did not talk, and you had to figure everything out through visual movement, through music cues, through editing, and everything like that. You had to figure everything out like that. I think it would have had a very beautiful film. Same with a movie like Homeward Bound. You know, both versions, the original and the new one. I think it would have been better here is if Minla never talked and none of the monsters talked, and it was just Ichiro figuring things out. Playing things out like a child would. A child observes things. A child asks questions. A child tries to figure things out. A child tries to understand things. They ask questions. They try to figure things out because they don't know. And I think you could have had the beginnings of something really, really good there, but they really fucked it up by making Minla talk. Granted, that was all out of Ishiro Honda's control. That was all the studio stuff. The studio was like, nah, they're not going to get him, blah, 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 blah. No! Because believe it or not, children are smart. Children are unbelievably smart. In some ways, I believe children are smarter than fucking adults. And I believe this movie could have really captured that if they just tweaked a few big things. And the other thing that would have been different and everything like that is that the ending, Ichiro joins the bullies. Instead of fighting the bullies, which he does, he joins them during the sequence where he pushes the guy off of the freaking ladder and almost kills him. What the fuck? That goes in the face of everything that we have just been taught. I would have had him just beat the shit out of the bullies and walk away with that girl that he liked so much. And the message would have been kept the same, and the message would have been better. But I believe you have the beginnings of something very, very interesting, a very good character-driven, growing of age kind of story of a child with a father who loves him but works too hard, and a father figure who makes toys and tells him to retreat to this fantasy world, of a child who retreats into a fantasy world to escape the reality in which he lives. That's very interesting stuff, and I will constantly defend this movie for having something interesting like that in it. However, with me defending what I just did with this movie, it having the chaotic backstory with production, Ishiro Honda having fucking no say whatsoever with this movie having no budget whatsoever, with the interesting ideas laid out on it that just weren't executed right, will I say that this movie is as bad as everyone says it is? Yes. This movie is a piece of fucking garbage because of how horribly it's executed. But I will at least try to defend it for what it did, and I hope I was able to do that here. So go on Facebook, like AM Productions, for up-to-date information on everything, including some interesting text reviews that I do, stuff that are not included onto the YouTube page. Like my new movie, Which Way They Walk, on Facebook. Like the Godzilla Saga. We're almost at 500 likes. Hit the subscribe button, hit the like button. Tell me why I'm a fucking retard like you always do in the comments below. And in the end, this is Adam Noyce of AN Productions saying, sayonara.